Hello and welcome to today's impactful conversation. Hope you've had a wonderful summer. You're back refreshed with that back to school energy and thinking ahead to the rest of the year and really thinking about, having the impact that you want to have in your leadership and really building, again, a higher level of performance within your team. So that's been the season, that's in the theme of the season. So far, we've been talking about how to build high performing teams over the past couple of episodes and thinking about practically how to bring that to life. Today we're going to go a little bit deeper into thinking about how to do that. We acknowledge that there's no one context that any leader is working from or that any team is working from either. And so today we'll be talking a little bit about some of those nuances, those different stages or contexts that teams can be working from. So we are honoured to welcome our guest today, Patrick. Glenn, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Nejmi. Somebody that you and I both know very well. It's an absolute pleasure to have Patrick Ballin join us today. Patrick, thanks so much for being part of the Impactful Conversation clan, I guess, which is lovely to have you on board.
Thank you.
So Patrick and I go back a very long way, and Nejmi, Patrick and I all work together for Exigence. And the reason that we've invited Patrick is that I think of all the people that I know, Patrick's been involved in helping develop high-performing teams for the greatest period of time. When I'm a bit stuck on working with teams, he's often the person that I'll go to and run an idea past, or see if he can help me in a kind of supervisory sense to help me through the challenges that we might be facing with teams. So Patrick, it's an absolute, as I say, it's genuinely an absolute pleasure to have you on board, and we're really looking forward to this conversation. Just for those that don't know a little bit about your background, would you mind just sharing sort of a 30-second pencil sketch of a bit of your background?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess I would say I'm on at least my third career at this point. Having started out in the IT world and then moved into corporate life and retail, and headed up global supply chain projects for an international retailer up until 2006. And since then, and actually, the last nearly 20 years have been coaching individual leaders and their teams. And alongside that, 10 years of doing work with my local business school, which is in Brighton, in South Downs. So in a snapshot, that's where I am. And those teams have been all shapes and sizes, both of numbers of people in the team, but also the sorts of organizations that they're a part of.
Yeah, and I think that's the focus for this particular episode, which is, how do leaders who are in different contexts, or indeed where their own context changes quite significantly, best placed to either start the high performance sort of journey, if you like, or indeed flex that approach based on how a context might change quite significantly. If we sort of think really broadly to start with, Patrick, what would be some of the broad contextual things that leaders might need to be aware of that would be impacting how their team is performing? What sort of things at that very highest level might play into impacting the team?
Well, at the very highest level, I guess, there's kind of a carousel of four main things. Then you can drill down into those, and there's a whole load of things. Some of the elements will be more important for certain teams than others. But the four headlines, if you like, things we keep coming back to: impact. So, what's this team here to do? What impact does it need to make? And inside that, how do I, as an individual member of this team, make an impact on the team? Behavior. How do we act with each other and with the other people we have to interact with, whether customers, colleagues, whoever that may be? Thirdly, identity. Who do we feel we are, and how do I feel I am within this team? And I say feel because it is often a felt sense of who we are and what we're about. Like, what shirt do I put on when I join this team that may be different from when I'm joining another team? And I'm probably being influenced here by the fact that the Women's Rugby World Cup is on at the moment. When I say the shirt I put on, my shirt would be the Welsh shirt, by the way, which is probably not the greatest. It's the greatest thing in the world, but maybe not the greatest thing in terms of performance right now. The fourth thing, impact, behaviour, identity, is leadership. How do we lead both? How is this team led, but also how does every member of this team show up and demonstrate leadership within the context of what this team has to do?
Nice. Okay, so there's four clear areas there that leaders can think about and that will be impacted by the context in which they're trying to get work done, right? So when you first work with a team, again, staying relatively high level to start with, and then Nejmi and I can sort of grill you down into sort of more detailed work that would be applicable for leaders in the moment. When you first meet a team, what are you looking for? What are you sort of scanning for when you meet them? Because my understanding is like our work, you tend to meet them in person, at least initially. Tell us what you scanning for and what leaders themselves might miss typically because they're embedded rather than external like you are.
Yeah, it's a great point, because that external extra pair of eyes will pick up things that if you're a part of it, you might just miss, perhaps because they're just too familiar. It's become part of the wallpaper. There's always a context. So before we've even met with the team, we'll have some understanding of where that team's trying to get to and where it is at the moment. And that's important because when we first engage with everybody together, typically that might be in an off-site room, or it might be observing one of their meetings. Knowing what that context is and where it is that they need to get to helps to identify where are they now? What are the things that they're starting with that might need to be worked on? And one of the big ones always is participation levels. You'll both have the experience. I know I've had the experience many, many times, not only in observing other teams, but being a member of teams, of the teams where there's a real reluctance for members to contribute when the team's together. Sometimes that's down to safety. Sometimes that's down to the leader feeling that they need to show leadership by filling the space. Sometimes it's just lack of familiarity or lack of clarity about what's expected from me as a member of this team. So whatever it is, so looking at participation levels and getting some sense of who's participating, how are they participating, who's sitting back, and what body language are they demonstrating, starts to get a bit of a picture of what may be at play here. Now that's a theory. It has to be tested in dialogue with the team, the members of the team. But that to me would always be a really big start point. What's the participation level like? Who are the contributors? Who are the people who are sitting back? It's easy to be judgmental about that, but usually there's a good reason why some people are sitting back. We've all been that person as well. So start to form a bit of a view. And often I'll actually literally draw that out as a heat map if I'm watching them in one of their own meetings, and just think about what interactions are going on and with what intensity, and where's the energy flowing in the room. So that's often a good start point.
I love that. So if I'm a leader, I'm thinking ahead to the rest of this year, and I'm thinking, well, actually, where's my team at today, and what do I want to move them towards? One thing to look at, like you just described, is participation levels. Actually doing a bit of an audit around how does that tend to show itself within my team when we're in a group setting. What can I practically do to help to level up the participation levels, if that was true?
Well, so part of the coach's role, I think, here is to play back what we're seeing. without judgment. What I notice is, in this situation, Glenn's talking a great deal. Nejmi, you've been very quiet. Maybe introduce some, at a light level, some theory. So, for example, with participation levels, there was the work that came out of Google's Project Aristotle, which we referred to in one of these earlier Impactful Conversations podcasts, is really relevant, because that showed that participation levels was one of the even participation levels was one of the telling factors for high performing teams over averagely performing teams. So it might maybe play that in. Again, the thing to be careful here is for that not to sound like judgment, but just to sound like, here's the bar. Let's start to understand what's going on. And again, notice what's happening when you ask the question. Are people coming forward easily? Are they reluctant? Does it feel like you're getting kind of pat answers, a bit of deflection? What's going on? And then continue to work with that. So the job of a coach, I think, is raise attention, raise awareness, then to observe and to keep asking questions for the team. So, okay, there's something here for us to that we hadn't noticed, that we can and should be working on, that will help us along.
I just want to pick up something you said and Patrick, and relate it back, if I might, to your opening idea of 4 areas that you would look at: impact, leadership, identity, and behaviours. I think if you, as a leader, did the sort of audit that you and Nejmi have been talking about, you spoke very clearly about this idea that there is both the collective, i.e. the whole team working, but there's also an individual element. How do I feel inside the team? What behaviours am I specifically, manifesting inside the team? So you've got this dynamic between the individual and the collective. Would it be fair to say that one of the challenges for leaders is if I had looked at participation at a collective level and said everybody needs to raise their game, you might get a very confused picture of things, and you might also get people who just feel, because the boss has said I need to contribute more, I'm going to repeat what Bill has just said because I haven't got an original thought myself, but I need to have airtime. How do you see that as the role of the leader as well, in terms of the kind of team coaching, i.e. the collective, but also the individual piece?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And there's a timing thing here. So noticing something and raising it doesn't always happen in the moment. Sometimes it's I've noticed this. I'm going to sit with that for a while. I'm going to maybe find a way for, particularly with larger teams or teams that are new to each other, to observe some more interaction within team members, and then start to raise, here are some of the things that I'm noticing. So a classic way we'll do that, particularly with a larger team, is we may say, let's get you doing some breakout activities. A team of 12, go off in 4 groups of 3, 3 groups of 4, whatever. There's a whole conversation. And work on an activity that is going to be helpful towards where the team's trying to get to. Very often, actually, it will be around something like purpose of the team. What's this team? What are the major impacts that this team needs to have? What's it here to do? Why do we exist as a team rather than just a bunch of individuals who each goes off and does his own thing or her own thing? And as they're working, continue to observe. Now, small group in small group work, typically participation levels go up. Quieter voices tend to be heard more. When people come back, there's a different energy. And again, you're kind of noticing, how does that look? How does that reflect the working patterns of this team general? Is everybody always in the room together? do they need to mix things up and think about routines that will change that energy, that will push, typically when teams sub-work out to subgroups, productivity levels go up for the whole team, but it creates an issue with how do those subgroups then report back. So we start to look at that. I don't know how good an answer that was to the specific question, but the point is, what you're not doing is diving in straight away with the observation. What you are doing is finding ways to continue to, necessarily, you're often finding ways to observe more interaction within whatever time you've got. And typically, what we will be wanting to do is to come back and work with the team on a number of different occasions over a period of time, if we can, rather than kind of just do the away day, which is going to have a certain impact, but typically it's going to be hard for the team to sustain that impact.
Yeah, and now I think you've made a really important point for leaders to think about, which is that there are two things actually that I took from your answer, which is, one is, don't make a snap judgment on one single instance. So gather some evidence. And I love the phrase noticing. I think that's, if leaders took nothing else away from this, I would just use noticing. I don't overuse words. It's a bit like journey and some of those other words, not to overuse. But I've noticed this is not a judgment. It's just I've noticed it. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying I've seen this. So that's one piece, is not to jump in on every single thing you notice as a leader. But secondly, some of it might need to be addressed at a team level, but it might be that the best way to resolve some of the challenge is to have a word with one or two individuals, about how they're contributing and why that might be, and seek to understand a bit more about that. So I think that's a really important point for leaders to take away. You've got this, yes, we can address some at a team level, and other points we might need to do that with the individuals. But not necessarily every individual in the team. So that was a really helpful answer. Thank you. Nejmi, looked like it looked like there was a question on the tip of your tongue there.
No, I agree with what you just described. I think the idea of not rushing in, I think, is really important. So hold off if you are looking at how can I quickly, invigorate the performance levels of these teams. Actually spending a bit of time to notice, to observe, to really get to grips with what you think might be underpinning what you expect to see is really, really important. When it comes to sort of unlocking, so you talked a little bit, Patrick, about sort of being a neutral observer, right? Like working as a coach, team coach, and being able to observe, play back different insights. Which is the starting point, right? Like diagnostic, I guess, but then moving forward into impact around change within the team, or having unlocking a different way forward within the team. How do you help leaders and teams to really unlock the way forward, unlock a different way forward? And what's the conversation that changes everything?
If only there was a magic question that worked for every team in every context. And let me give an example, because if you take, say, a team that's already performing well but is trying to get to the next level. A great question. It was Rachel in the last Impactful Conversations podcast actually into this use this, is what altitude does this team need to be flying at? I love that. It's similar to Professor Henry Mintzberg. He has a version of that question. He's the granddaddy of peer coaching, which he uses with teams, which is, what orbit do you need to be in? I love that as well. And it provokes some different thinking for a team that maybe has been coasting along about, are we too much in the weeds? Are we, where do we need to be kind of upping the level? That metaphor forces the conversation. Teams in different situations might need, it might be a different question from that.
So that's a good link actually, Patrick, which is, if teams are in different contexts, how might that impact how the leader should be working with them? So, new leader to a new team, or new leader to a very established team, or merging of two teams, how do you see the different contexts? How should leaders think about the different contexts and how they then might do the work that you've been talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting because I know we try to avoid that J word, journey, but all teams are on a journey. They're a trajectory, if you like, from here's where we are to the impact. Here's where we need to be in whatever time frame that is, and that's going to be both the start point and the end point going to be different for every team we encounter. Let me give a specific example. One of the teams that Glenn, you and I worked with last year, established team, a member of the team had been promoted to head up the team when the former leader retired. There's a situation where getting the team to refocus on where are we now, what do we want to be as a kind of reinvented team, rather than carry forward the assumptions of, well, this is what we were doing before, so it carries on the same way. How does that come out in identity, behavior, the way we work together? It became really important. In this case, it was a team where they hadn't spent much time together physically because they were dispersed over a number of locations. So actually, we started, one of the conversations we started with was, what's made you the sort of leader you are today? And everybody in turn talked about that, because they got to learn more about each other, and that was for them foundational, because they needed to just get to know each other a little better for them to become the team that they were now going to be. For other teams, it's going to be very different from that.
Yeah, so if I just I want to play that back to see if I understood that correctly, Patrick. So if, let's say, you're a leader who has inherited a team, whether you've kind of moved up into the new leadership role or you've come in and the team was already established and existed already, there's real value in doing some of the work to help re-establish what the identity of the team is that needs to what is the identity, what behaviors need to shape our focus as we look ahead. So re-establishing the parameters, if you like, of what the team is, how the team operates, can be a really effective sort of place to focus. Is that fair? Is that
absolutely. And there's a cliche around teams, which is when one member of a team changes, it becomes an entirely new team. And of course, there's some truth in that. And if that's the head of the team, or it's two teams coming from different parts of the organization, or two different organizations and merging, that's even more the case. One of the things I'm always mindful of is when we're working with a team where membership has changed, not to carry the assumption that everything's going to carry on as before, because for some of the team members there isn't any as before. We need to kind of rewrite, get them to rewrite the rule book. If they've got an explicit rule book, you can start with that. Or you may go, what do you want to do? Do you want to rip up and start over, or do you want to kind of build on what you had before? Good conversation.
I really like that. It reminds me of, I went through a similar experience of a team that I led a few years ago, where it was evolving rapidly. So every quarter we'd take on 2 or 3 more people, and it grew from like a 1-person team to a 30-person team over like 36 months. It was, we were constantly reestablishing those parameters. But after a particularly, accelerated period of growth, it really did feel like a completely different team. And so my thinking was, I need to try and do some work here without being furnished with the framework that you've described, Patrick. So I really could have done with this conversation a few years back. But through the medium of storytelling. So I was, in my thinking, I was like, I need to do some work to honor where we've come from so that people have the context. So paint a picture of the before, this is where we evolved from for the guys or for the folks that were new to the team. The current, like giving an honest assessment of where we were at, our challenges, our goals, and what we aspired. Well, that's what followed, is the future, what we aspired to be. more focused around outcome or impacts from your model, less focused around sort of behaviors, pardon me, leadership and identity. But I could really see how that benefit could have played into, now that we've got the team together, actually, let's spend some time defining what's going to be required of us to get us to this kind of future vision of where we want to be.
Yeah, what a fabulous thing to do. And honouring that history with the team and the continuity, as well as recognising that where we are now is very different from where we started out, and putting that future focus. Yeah, what a great way of approaching that. Thank you for that, Nejmi.
Yeah, it's a really, you've both prompted a question from me, which is, I think we might have mentioned this before, Nejmi, which is the specific challenge of global teams, so disparate teams. There's some recent research about the sort of draining effect or the potential burnout effect of teams having to work, to a 24-hour schedule globally, getting together and collaborating a lot. What's any sort of insights or experiences with global teams and the specific challenge there for leaders in relation to that context?
Well, some of the contextual factors for how those teams operate often are really challenging, even just down to things like time zones and languages, right? That team, Glenn, that you and I worked with, I remember had teams that were spread from kind of Australia and the Philippines through to North America. There was no time in the day when everybody was in their normal work day and able to meet with everybody else. So there, for a start, if we're going to hang out together as a team, how are we going to do it? Was a big, real question for that team, and something that they worked on with our support. Like all dispersed teams, many of us are now in hybrid or virtual teams. The other challenge is just we're not in the room together. Trust works in a different way. If you and I have
say more about that.
Yeah, so if you and I have spent time together, we've worked in the same place, we've hung out, we know each other, we've picked up some good assumptions, bad assumptions around how each other operate. There's a level of many studies around trust. Proximity is a factor that doesn't automatically happen, but can contribute to high levels of trust. With virtual or dispersed teams, you have to create those opportunities, whether it's flying everybody in, not easy to do, not always great, not the greatest thing for carbon footprint, or finding virtual touch points where people can check in. Simply having points in, for example, a team meeting where you do a personal check-in before you get into the, what are the 2 or 3 things that are top of our list on the team's agenda that we need to focus on today, can be really significant for those teams, because they get to know a little bit more about each other as people, what's going on in their lives. That could seem fluffy, but it isn't, because it's a trust builder. And teams that work well need to have high levels of trust, because when the pressure's on, the chips are down, you need to know who you can rely on, and that you can lean in on each other, offer support, ask for support, and that you're going to be there for each other. How many times have you heard people say, the best teams I was ever a part of were the teams where everybody had each other's backs? That's all about trust. So that's creating opportunities for those teams to increase trust when they don't have proximity, to me, is one of the most important things. One other thing, virtual teams, the opportunities for team members, particularly in high change environments, for team members to go out of step with each other. In that 8 hours that Europe was asleep, something happened in Australia, and suddenly, where we thought we were is not where we are, and people start getting head up about that. Opportunities, typically teams, particularly in high change environments, teams that check in with each other regularly, both increase trust because they're seeing more of each other, and they stay better aligned. It doesn't have to be huge amounts of the schedule every day, but those check-ins can be super important. So
just on the topic of trust, it just made me think recently with clients, leadership coaching clients, executive coaching clients, the topic of trust always comes up. It's synonymous with leadership, I think. And a really simple tool, again, if you're a leader listening to this, thinking about, well, actually, where are the trust levels within my team? Both what do I think, how trusted am I of those within my team, but also what that connective tissue around how we need to function is to do a trust audit. There's a the trust equation, I think, is described in a book by Charles Green. Talks about a few different components: credibility, reliability, intimacy, all sort of undermined by being too self-oriented or added to by being other-oriented. Is using those sort of components to do just a bit of a trust audit across key stakeholders, all of the members across the team. Actually, how trusting are you of those around you, and compiling that insight so that you've got then a clear idea or even opportunity for feedback around like where people can be focused to continue to be that kind of good citizen within the team and to help contribute towards fostering an even greater sense of trust in the environment that they're contributing towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, inside teams, those sorts of trust audits become really valuable. Typically not as a day one thing, but fairly early on when working with a team, getting them to assess, what's the level of trust within this team. You kind of have to get to a certain level of safety for team members to have that conversation. So that's where, again, observing where's this team at, are they ready for this, becomes important. But it can be a game-changing conversation for some teams. The other thing that is almost always the case, I've known almost no team that did not have some sort of relationship with people outside of the team that was absolutely critical for the team to achieve what it needed to achieve. Yeah, it's always the case. So moving that on, again, for many teams, and take the case we talked about earlier, a team that's say formed with a delivery that's got to happen in 3 months. Early on in engagement with that team, getting them to assess what's the state of trust within the team, what's the state of trust with those relationships outside of the team, and what can we do, and which existing relationships will help us to leverage and extend that trust, becomes really important. It gives some focus on, we don't need to do everything with everybody, but here we really do, because it's critical for our impacts. Great conversations to have. That's kind of, to me, that's at the heart of the sort of thing that can happen in coaching with teams and makes a real difference for some teams.
Can I extend that idea then, which is you've talked about safety a couple of times. You've used the word safety a couple of times. I wonder whether I might just quickly ask you to talk to leaders about what you mean by safety and what the implications are for leaders. So I think that will be my first question. And my second question is, I know it's for a very deep topic on one level, but keep it in a way that leaders can grab hold of relatively easily if you can. But so there's that. But I want to link or then ask you to build on that in relation to trust and these challenging conversations that teams often tell us they need to have but aren't having. And how does that play into the trust piece? How does it play into safety? And why are those challenging conversations? So I've got about 15 questions wrapped in there, Patrick. You pick any of the top 3. I'm particularly interested in the word safety and it's that extended idea of conversations, but that are deemed challenging.
Great. And in order to be able to have challenging conversations, a level of trust is a prerequisite. Right? very difficult to have an effective, challenging conversation without having a foundation of trust. Because who's going to listen to you? And that starts with, I think, a bit of a leadership self-assessment. I'm going to kind of unpack that with kind of two different components. One is, as head of the team, what we sometimes call the nominal leader of the team. A question that we might have early on is, are all the members of the team, of your team, able to say what they need to say in service of the performance of the team and its members when they need to say it? Are all members of this team able to say what they need to say in service of the performance of this team and its members? And once you get beyond, typically maybe a first, oh yeah, of course. Can you think of any examples where that might not be the case, or where that's been more of a challenge? I think you get where I'm going. There's something there to get to, which helps leaders to think about, how do I create a climate where that does become possible? Where if I need to give some feedback to Nejmi about something that's really important for the functioning of this team, it might be about how we behave with each other. It might be about some specific outcomes. I can say what needs to be said. And he's not going to take offense, because he's going to go, this is just what we do in this team. This is how we operate. And I trust that what Patrick says to me is with good intent. So that's one side of it. And as a specific tool, I've found Stephen Covey Jr.'s 13 trust behaviors really helpful here. Sometimes I will get people in teams to even self-assess. How am I doing consistently on these in the context of this team? Because they talk about behavior. How do I show up? How do I interact with others? They also talk about, how do I demonstrate competence? So how does my competence? Because we tend to trust people who are good at what they do, right? And that can be, again, useful as a tool to have in the back pocket. So when we're working with the team, actually, this is surfacing. Let's go and do some examination of where are we there? Where are each of you? And I want you to do a self-assessment, and I want you to do it in the context of this specific team. That can be really revealing.
I really like what you just said there, Patrick. I think, if I'm a leader, listening to this, thinking about how can I have the biggest impact on my team, actually, maybe it just starts with self-inquiry, to do a bit of an honest assessment, get some input, some feedback around some of the ingredients around high performance. It might be a bit uncomfortable, but can be really, really illustrative around where you might want to focus in order to have the biggest impact on your team as you look ahead. So I really like that as a prompt. And also the idea of what you were describing around safety, something that I've been talking quite a lot recently with other leaders around, is this idea of not taking silence as golden. So common, so comfortable to just, expect that you've just announced something, that, a new idea or whatever, and you're getting the nods or the, very little back. You've asked for any questions or challenges, nothing's come back, and you think, yep, good, everybody's understood it. Everybody's going to move forward in the way in which I expect. But we all know that people have their resistances, people have their questions, that they might not have felt comfortable to pose in that context. And so actually just see silence as a problem rather than a tick, a pat on the back that everything is good, and actually go after increasing the level of safety, increasing the level of challenge around status quo, really asking for dissent, because then that way you're going to get even more input that's going to help to contribute towards better decisions and better outcomes for the team.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think there's some really valuable prompts for leaders to think about in relation to several of those environmental, cultural things that you build up inside the team: trust, challenge, having conversations that need to be had. I think there's a lot in there. Just really quickly, I will mention that we'll add the Stephen Covey Jr. link to the trust exercise that you talked about, Patrick, in the show notes, so that people can reference those and have them as a resource. We could go on because I think we're in some ways it feels like we're just beginning to lift the lid on yet another level of depth, and we could go even deeper again. So Patrick, what we might ask you at some stage to do, if you'd be up for it, is to come back and join us on another conversation at a later date, because this has been an absolute goldmine of really useful insights that I'm sure leaders will have benefited from. So it'd be lovely to have you back at some point.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a great session. Thank you everybody for listening. Hope you've found, as I'm sure I'm speaking for Nejmi, but I'm sure we both found lots of really useful insights there that we weren't aware of or reminded us about. And hopefully they've been practical enough for you as a leader to be able to take away and genuinely make impact on the team and begin its process towards that new trajectory, as Patrick talked about, towards high performance. It's working on the team, not just doing the work of the team. And I think that's something that you've talked about very eloquently, Patrick. So thank you very much for that. It's been a pleasure to have you as part of the Impactful Conversations tribe, and our audience will have benefited from it. We look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you very much indeed. Go away and try and make some of these things happen. And we'd love to hear about the positive impacts you've had on your team in the next session. One thing I just need to mention is that at the end of September, we will have our next roundtable event, to which you're all invited. More information about that on the website, and we look forward to seeing you at the end of September at that roundtable event. Until then, this is Nejmi Alexander, Dr. Glenn Wallace, and our friend Patrick Ballin saying thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Take care.